watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Governor Pritzker said earlier this month he has a laser focus on legalizing sports betting in Illinois. Illinois could become the 11th state to do that nationwide after Indiana did that just this week. He may very well need that laser focus to get it all done. Joining us now, two of the House Democrats who are leading the charge on video gaming and sports gambling here, Mike Zalewski and Bob Rita. Good to have you both with us.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Let's look into, we're going to get into video gaming, which is a part of the governor's budget, but also sports gambling here and kind of go back and forth here. You joined us earlier in the session when there were 5 amendments, 5 plans, 5 different directions that lawmakers could go. You've paired 3 of those off and you've whittled it down to just 2. Is this an either or, Amendment 1 or Amendment 2? Why these 2, and what's happened since you were last here?
Mark, we felt like we needed sort of a final competition of ideas among the different stakeholders. There's things to like in both amendments, things not to like in both amendments. We wanted to force some strange bedfellows and have a conversation about what the final amendment would look like. We think we had a good hearing yesterday and accomplished that goal.
So you've got casinos who are uncomfortable with the tax rates and don't necessarily want to be forced in with the pro sports. Is that one of the strange bedfellows?
That's a fair statement, yes.
What's the role of FanDuel and DraftKings here? These are online fantasy sports leagues that have existed for a while. Is it Amendment 2 that or Amendment 1 that would tell them they have to sit this one out for a period of time, 3 years? Why is that important to do?
It's very much up to the colleagues to decide whether to do. I would say that there's bricks and mortar casinos in Illinois that feel like they have an unfair market advantage by never having gotten licensed. We heard from their lawyer yesterday, and we're going to try to see what members feel about whether these companies should operate a sports wagering license or not.
So you've dealt with this whole issue, the broad issue of gambling and gaming in the state for some time. Did you guys have any preliminary discussions when going into this and saying, okay, here's how we should approach it differently this time?
Well, we've had, prior to the session starting, we were taking 2 paths, sports betting in one path and then the traditional gaming in another path. Sports betting being a newer to this mix of compared to the traditional gaming that we've been doing. We've been working collaboratively together on both issues because a lot of it is all put together. No different than expanding casinos and looking at VGTs and expanding different. It has the same issues, same components that sports betting does. There's all these interests are trying to compete for, what's best for them, what's not good for them. So it is all intertwined. But we're trying to take the approach of taking it separately. But it is all intertwined because you're dealing with current casinos that are looking new casinos, and then both into sports betting and looking at how
we're all games of chance.
Gaming expansion would be.
They have many of the same different companies, competing interests involved supporting it, many of the same people opposing them, so that they do have a lot of interconnectivity, I suppose. But those video gaming terminals that you mentioned, Governor Pritzker's budget called for raising the tax. There's 30,000 of those terminals, those video gaming across the state. He's calling for a progressive tax on those. What is that? And I understand some mom and pop shops, some VFW halls, some saloons and such came to Springfield this week saying, "Don't tax us."
Well, in his budget address, he talked about getting more revenue from VGTs or gaming terminals, and that was what his statement was. He's looking for $89 million. Part of that doesn't necessarily have to be. He didn't lay out exactly how he would do it, except for maybe raising the taxes. There's some alternative plans coming from the association, those in the business of looking at raising some of the fees and how their fee structure are, but it doesn't necessarily have to be on a progressive, non-progressive, but looking at how additional revenue could come in, along with
the small businesses. Though they're saying, look, we already had to deal with the smoking ban years ago. Now we have to adjust our bottom line to pay for this $15 minimum wage that's coming. We just can't afford higher taxes on this thing that was these video gaming terminals that were supposed to be a source of revenue for us. Are you sensitive to that concern? And will you? Is there still some negotiation that can happen to help small businesses?
I think it's all part of a negotiation. No one wants to go in and hurt these small businesses, but in part of it could be through fees and maybe a tax. They're also looking at raising the minimum bet from $2 to $4, which would automatically generate more revenue. Adding a 6th machine, adding progressive. So there's some other components that could be added to the video gaming that could generate additional revenue, along with part of looking at the fees. So we're working through that now.
All
we
right.
just had a hearing and heard some of the
Still
testimony.
a ways to go here, about
Yes.
another full 3 weeks before this is all said and done.
Well, the other part is they're also looking at sports betting too. So,
And that's what I want to ask you about. There could be some other type of kiosks or machines popping up across the state under one of your plans. The Illinois Lottery would back this, and you couldn't make individual sports bets at one of these kiosks, but you could do a parlay where you take 4 at a time and it has a bigger payout. Why was it important to keep the lottery? That was one of your initial 5 plans. Now they've sort of grafted into another one of your plans here. How did that happen, and what benefit does the lottery infrastructure provide this rollout?
We feel like the lottery is a state asset that we get all the benefit from, so we should at least try to consider whether it makes sense for sports betting to have a part of the lottery as part of its machinations. A second reason to do it is it helps our local retailers. They all have lottery machines in their stores, and if we can drive a little bit of traffic into local retailers to try to get them, maybe they go in to buy something and they decide to do a pick, or maybe vice versa, they go in to make a pick and they decide to buy something. We're trying to make this as fair to everybody as we can, and we think the lottery serves that purpose.
We've heard from pro sports leagues that have been here. They want a piece of the pie, but we also heard from collegiate sports this week. The NCAA, the athletic director at the U of I, Josh Whitman, was at one of your hearings on Wednesday, and he raised an interesting point. He said nobody in the stadium wants to look at each other after someone misses a free throw or drops a pass and wonder, did that player do that for the wrong reason once gambling has been introduced? They don't want gambling on college sports at all. I understand one of your proposals is receptive to that idea, but to the broader sense of sports, how do you protect the integrity of the game when, we've seen big scandals before that have to do with whenever gambling touches professional sports or sports at all, there's that risk. Does your bill address that, and how does it give people at home, the viewers, the fans, some sense of comfort that there will be some security?
I think the director's comments were saying that an amateur athlete shouldn't have to worry about a betting event, and we're very receptive to that. We think we can work on language that addresses that concern. I would say, sort of a global answer to your question though, the NCAA and these institutions of higher ed, I think, need to have a hard look at the way they treat their athletes as component pieces of a money-making operation as opposed to amateur athletes. We long ago left whether these athletes are sort of student athletes that are there to get a scholarship and an education, and got into the realm of whether they're there to basically make institutions of higher learning a lot of money. And I think that's a real struggle for us as lawmakers of we're trying to differentiate between a professional athlete and a student athlete. Now we're going to try to address Mr. Whitman's concerns, but we're also aware of the idea that this is big business for everybody.
Is it possible, or have you ruled it out that we may be able to still bet on college sports in Illinois, or is that?
We're working on a compromise provision which basically would not allow for games involving Illinois teams, but that's very much under discussion.
Okay, you've seen this happen before. Give us your parting thoughts on where this is headed and just how difficult this is going to be to get all the right ingredients together to get enough votes, 60 votes in the House, to pass this thing.
We have a lot of time left, even though it doesn't seem like it, in going into these last few weeks in May. What's different that we haven't had in the past, the last 4 years, we were just trying to put a state budget together. We didn't have a governor that was interested in this. And prior to that, we had a governor that vetoed the last gaming expansion bill. We have a governor that is very interested in the sports betting. As you can see, it was part of his budget, part of the revenues for that in the budget, but is interested in this in gaming expansion. So that's the difference for, say, the last 6 years. What we have now, along with what Mike taking the lead on sports betting, that coming into the mix is a different dynamic than what we've had in the past.
Years ago, this is a long time ago now, before he was governor, J.B. Pritzker sat on a board with Jim Edgar of a horse racing track. He's got a particular interest there, I suppose. Have you found any, is he insightful in these discussions? You've had negotiations with the governor's office. Does he have anything to offer besides just putting pressure on people to vote yes? Is he adding anything to this discussion?
I think as a CEO, governor who has done venture capital work, He sort of has a general understanding of the way the industry works. I think he wants Illinois' marketplace to be modern, and that includes an online component. So, in the sense that he's a venture capital sort of incubator type governor, I think he wants to see success here, and I think it's helped guide his thinking. I
got to ask you one last question off topic before we let you guys go. But this was interesting this week, and we have to include it in our broadcast, I hope. But there was this windfall at the Department of Revenue this month, $1.5 billion of extra money. That doesn't happen very often in Illinois. The budget office for the governor and the Department of Revenue put out this big letter and said, hey, we found a lot of money, thanks in part to the change in the federal tax code. Some deductions and withholdings were different, so we have all this extra money. Now Governor Pritzker is reversing his most controversial plan to shortchange pensions. You chair Revenue and Finance.
Yes.
How does this change your calculations in the budget-making process going into FY 2020?
There's a shortfall that we have to address. This helped that shortfall, but we have a lot of work to do yet.
So it doesn't alleviate all the pressure, but some. All right, representatives.
Just a short-term pressure on that. I mean, you have to look at it. How many were these one-time fees that were being paid, one-time revenues? And when we look at that, it's a little bit, but when you look at the whole thing as a picture, it's just a small portion.
Are you both yes votes on the progressive income tax?
I am, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, they said yes. There's one Democrat in the House who says no. Actually, two of them. We're going to talk to one of them next. Representative Mike Zalewski and Bob Rita, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
We're back in a moment.